My uncle claimed me as his future wife 6 hours after I was born. Every Sunday, he trained me to serve his favorite whiskey at the perfect temperature, teaching me the precise angle to hold the glass, the exact number of ice cubes he preferred. When my 12-year-old cousin Emma was found locked in a basement after 6 weeks of what the family called extended training, the FBI discovered our family's 5-century-old registry documenting which girls had been claimed by their uncles and how they were groomed to become perfect wives by age 13. You see, in my family, male relatives got to claim female cousins as future wives the day we were born. We called it preserving the family legacy. And I genuinely thought every family did this until I was 11 years old and casually mentioned to my classmate Sarah that my Uncle Kenneth was my future husband. Her face went completely white, draining of all color as she stared at me in horror. "That's illegal," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "and gross." I laughed because I thought she was joking, thought she was being dramatic like she always was during our lunch conversations. She wasn't joking at all. The rules were simple and had been followed for generations without question. Any girl born into the family belonged to whichever uncle claimed her first. My Uncle Kenneth claimed me 6 hours after my birth, arriving at the hospital with flowers for my mother and documents for my father to sign. My cousin Amy belonged to her Uncle Thomas since she was 2 days old. The claiming ceremony performed right there in the nursery. My younger sister Lucy was promised to Uncle Henry before Mom even left the hospital. The arrangements made while she was still in recovery from her C-section. The men would celebrate, each claiming with expensive cigars and aged whiskey imported from Scotland. They'd gather in my grandfather's study, toasting to another successful investment in the family's future. The claiming ceremonies were treated like business transactions, complete with contracts and witnesses. When you turned 13, the grooming visits started in earnest. Uncle Kenneth would pick me up every Sunday afternoon for what he called training sessions. I learned which brand of whiskey he preferred, how many degrees cold it should be, the exact angle for serving, how to massage his shoulders after a long day at his law firm, which perfume made him happy. He taught me to walk in heels, to style my hair the way he liked, to speak softly and never interrupt when men were talking. If I messed up during these sessions, if I served the drink too warm or forgot the right number of ice cubes, I'd have to stand in the corner holding heavy law books above my head until my arms shook and tears streamed down my face. "How will you be a good wife if you can't even remember simple things?" he'd ask, his voice disappointed rather than angry, which somehow made it worse. Sometimes he'd make me practice walking in the wedding shoes he'd already bought for our future ceremony. They were size 6, pure white satin with small pearls embroidered on the sides. I was still a size 4, my feet swimming in those shoes, stumbling as I tried to walk gracefully across his living room. Amy turned 16 first among us cousins. I watched her commitment ceremony from my designated seat in the third row, my mother's hand firmly on my shoulder to keep me from fidgeting. That's when the claiming became official and you moved into your uncle's house permanently. She wore white lace that her Uncle Thomas had selected himself, the dress hanging loose on her thin frame. Uncle Thomas, 53 years old with 2 previous wives who had already passed away, slipped his original claiming ring from her baby years onto her now adult finger. The ring had been resized 3 times as she grew. She threw up twice during the vows, rushing to the bathroom while the guests murmured sympathetically. They said it was nerves, normal bride stuff that happened to lots of girls. Her parents sat in the front row, her mother dabbing at tears while her father counted the cash envelope they'd received for successfully raising her to marriageable age. 2 months after her ceremony, Amy was in the hospital with severe kidney problems that the doctors couldn't quite explain. 3 months after that, she was dead. They said she was too weak for childbearing, that her body simply couldn't handle the stress of trying to conceive the heir Uncle Thomas desperately wanted. Uncle Thomas was already browsing the family registry for his next claim by the day of her funeral, running his finger down the list of available girls while we stood at her graveside. I heard him tell my father he preferred younger ones next time. "They last longer," he said, as casual as if he were discussing car models. "They're more adaptable to training." But my little cousin Emma was different from the rest of us. She had what the family elders called outside exposure and a rebellious streak. Her mom had accidentally enrolled her in public school instead of our family's carefully controlled homeschool network. At age 10, Emma was already asking uncomfortable questions like, "Why can't I pick my own husband? And what if I don't want to marry anyone at all?" She'd sneak library books about women's rights into family gatherings, hiding them under her traditional dress that we all had to wear to Sunday dinners. Once, I caught her reading a biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the bathroom during Thanksgiving dinner. Emma got pulled from public school after that incident. They started her grooming visits early to fix her thinking and eliminate the outside influence. Uncle Adam took her to his cabin in northern Michigan every weekend for what he called intensive training to prepare her for her role. When she came back each Sunday night, she had bruises she wasn't allowed to talk about, dark marks on her arms that she covered with long sleeves even in summer. Once she tried to show me finger-shaped bruises on her upper arms, pulling me into the pantry during a family gathering. Her mother caught us and slapped her hard across the face. "Good wives don't complain," her mother said coldly. "They endure with grace." Everything changed dramatically when I was 15 years old. Emma, now 12, didn't come back from a weekend training visit. Uncle Adam called to say she was being particularly difficult and needed extended training at the cabin. 2 weeks passed without any word, then 3, then a full month. My aunt assured everyone at family gatherings that Emma was fine, just learning important lessons about obedience and her place in the family structure. Here's the sick part that still makes my stomach turn. We were living in suburban Detroit the whole time. Normal suburb with white picket fences, normal families all around us, people who went to PTA meetings and Little League games. My parents told us other families just didn't understand the importance of keeping wealth in the bloodline, of maintaining pure family connections. They let their daughters marry strangers who dilute everything we've built, my mother would say with disdain. Americans are too soft. They've forgotten the old ways that keep families strong and prosperous. Emma had been gone 6 weeks when her former public school teacher, Miss Chen, showed up at our door on a Tuesday afternoon. She'd been trying to check on her former student, worried after Emma had been withdrawn so suddenly. My parents smiled sweetly, offering her tea and homemade cookies. "Oh, Emma's visiting relatives out of state," they lied smoothly, having practiced this story. "She's getting specialized education from family members who understand her needs." But Miss Chen had already called the police about a missing child, had already filed reports with Child Protective Services. When the police found Emma locked in Uncle Adam's cabin basement, she weighed 68 pounds, down from 90. She'd been kept in a dog crate for refusing to accept her future role in the family. The police said she had infected wounds from trying to claw her way out of the metal cage. Her fingernails were completely gone, worn down to bloody stumps from scratching desperately at the bars. Within 3 hours of finding Emma, FBI agents were seizing our family registry from the safe in grandfather's house. 5 centuries of claiming records meticulously maintained. Photos of commitment ceremonies going back generations. Young girls in white dresses standing next to uncles old enough to be their grandfathers. Death certificates of wives who never made it past 25. Their causes of death always listed as complications from childbirth or mysterious illnesses. 17 family members got arrested that day in coordinated raids across 3 states. My Uncle Kenneth tried to grab me as they put him in handcuffs, screaming that I belonged to him, that he had the legal papers to prove it, that they were destroying centuries of tradition. We thought it was over then. The girls were finally safe. The uncles were in custody. The system that had destroyed so many lives was finally exposed. I was wrong, so terribly wrong, because 3 weeks later, I got a call from the prosecutor assigned to our case. "The judge just threw out all the charges," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Insufficient evidence to prove coercion. They're being released tomorrow morning." Then I noticed it, as she spoke, a small scar on her wrist, visible on the video call, the same marking all the claimed wives had after their ceremonies, a small brand that was part of the ritual. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hit the end button. Released tomorrow, all 17 of them, including Uncle Kenneth, who still believed I belonged to him, who had spent years training me for a life I never chose. Mom walked into the kitchen as I stood there frozen, her face calm as always, showing no emotion. She poured herself tea from the kettle and sat across from me at the kitchen table we'd shared thousands of meals at. Her movements were precise, controlled, the way she'd taught me to move since I could walk. She noticed my shaking hands and frowned disapprovingly. "Control yourself," she said quietly. "Ladies don't show weakness." I told her about their prosecutor's call, about the charges being dropped, about them all coming home. Her expression didn't change at all. She sipped her tea, set the cup down with a soft clink against the saucer, and folded her hands in her lap, the way she always did when preparing to say something important. Then she stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains aside slightly to look at the street, checking for something or someone. "The family endures," she said simply. "The family always endures." The doorbell rang an hour later, the sound seeming to echo through the house like a death knell. Uncle Kenneth stood on our porch, still wearing the same clothes from his arrest 3 weeks ago, rumpled and stained. His eyes found mine immediately through the screen door, and he smiled, that same patient smile from every Sunday training session. Mom opened the door wide and bowed deeply, the traditional greeting for a claiming uncle. I backed away instinctively, but she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and pulled me forward. Uncle Kenneth stepped inside, removed his shoes carefully, and placed them neatly by the door as if he'd never been gone. He walked to the living room with the confidence of someone who belonged there, settling into his usual chair. My father appeared from his study and embraced his brother warmly, as if the arrest had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. They sat together on the couch while Mom served them tea, the same routine we'd followed for years. Uncle Kenneth patted the spot beside him on the couch, the same spot where I'd practiced sitting properly for hours, learning the exact angle to cross my ankles, how to keep my back straight but not rigid. I ran upstairs instead, my feet pounding on each step. My bedroom door didn't have a lock, something I'd never questioned before but now seemed like another bar in an invisible cage. I pushed my heavy wooden dresser against the door, the furniture scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and sat on my bed, listening to the voices downstairs. Laughter floated up through the floorboards. Casual conversation like nothing had happened. Like Emma wasn't still in the hospital, like Amy wasn't dead. Like our lives weren't built on generations of horror. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Emma messaging from her hospital room where she was still recovering. She wanted to know if I was safe, if the uncles were really coming back, if the nightmare was starting all over again. I told her about Uncle Kenneth's return, typing quickly with shaking fingers. She typed for a long time, the 3 dots appearing and disappearing as she started and stopped her message. Finally, she sent 2 words that changed everything. Get out. But where could I go? This was my family, my entire world. Everything outside had been described as dangerous, corrupting, inferior to our ways. I'd been trained since birth to fear the outside world as much as I'd been trained to serve whiskey at the perfect temperature. The training went deep, woven into every thought and instinct. A soft knock came at my door, patient and measured. Uncle Kenneth's voice came through, gentle as always during our training sessions. He reminded me about the wedding shoes waiting in his car, how they were still the perfect size 6. How we had so much catching up to do after the unfortunate interruption. The dresser scraped against the floor as he tested the door, finding it blocked. I climbed out my bedroom window onto the roof, the same route Amy had shown me years ago, when we'd sneak out to look at stars and dream of different lives. She'd told me then about her plans to run away before her ceremony, had mapped out bus routes, and calculated how much money she'd need. 2 weeks later, she was in the hospital. 3 months later, dead at 16. The neighbor's porch light turned on suddenly, illuminating Mrs. Patterson as she stepped outside with her recycling bin. She saw me on the roof and stopped mid-step, the bin forgotten in her hands. We stared at each other across the darkness. She'd lived next door for 10 years, had probably heard things through the walls, had watched girls come and go from our house. She set down her bin slowly and went back inside without a word. But she left her door slightly open, porch light still on. I climbed down carefully and ran barefoot across the wet grass. No shoes, no coat, no money, just my phone and the clothes I was wearing. The street was empty and suburban quiet. Normal houses with normal families inside watching TV or making dinner, living lives where uncles didn't own their nieces. None of them knew what happened in our house. Or maybe they suspected, but chose not to see. 3 blocks away, I called Miss Chen, Emma's teacher who had saved her. She answered immediately like she'd been waiting by the phone. She gave me an address and told me to hurry, to stay off main roads, to trust no one who might know my family. I ran faster, my socks soaking through from the wet pavement, my breath forming clouds in the cold night air. The address led to a small apartment building on the other side of town. Miss Chen met me at the entrance, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and led me inside quickly. Checking over her shoulder as we climbed the stairs. Her apartment was tiny but warm, filled with books and papers, photos of students covering one wall. On her coffee table sat a thick folder labeled with our family name in neat handwriting. She'd been investigating us for years, she explained as she made me tea with shaking hands, ever since her first claimed wife student 20 years ago. A girl who had died at 19 from complications during pregnancy. She showed me photos and documents she'd collected, death certificates and hospital records, patterns spanning decades. Girls who died young from accidents or illness that didn't quite make sense. Girls who disappeared and were never reported missing, their families simply saying they'd moved away. My phone rang constantly with calls from Mom, Dad, Uncle Kenneth, and other relatives. The screen lit up again and again until I finally turned it off, the silence both relieving and terrifying. Miss Chen made me tea and sat beside me on her worn couch, pulling her legs up under her. She had the same scar on her wrist that the prosecutor had, the claiming mark that I now recognized. She'd escaped her own family 30 years ago, she told me quietly, rolling up her sleeve to show the full scar. Changed her name, built a new life, became a teacher specifically to watch for girls like us. She'd saved 12 over the years, creating a network of safe houses and new identities. Emma was number 13. I could be 14 if I wanted. The choice was mine to make, but leaving meant losing everything I'd ever known. My parents, my siblings, my cousins who were still trapped in the system. It meant admitting that my entire life had been built on something monstrous, that love in my family came with a price tag and an expiration date. It meant accepting that everything I'd been taught was a lie designed to keep us compliant. Miss Chen let me sleep on her couch that night, exhausted from fear and running. I dreamed of Amy in her white dress throwing up during her ceremony while our family clapped politely. Of Emma in a dog crate, her fingers bloody from scratching at metal bars. Of Uncle Kenneth's patient smile as he waited for me to make mistakes during training so he could correct me. Nothing says normal suburban Michigan family quite like having a centuries-old bride registry where uncles call dibs on newborn nieces like they're reserving tables at an exclusive restaurant. I woke to pounding on the apartment door, the sound violent and demanding. Miss Chen was already dressed and standing by the window, peering through a crack in the blinds. Through the peephole, I saw my father and 3 uncles in the hallway, their faces twisted with rage. They knew where I was. Of course they did. We'd been taught that the family knew everything, saw everything, owned everything, that there was no escape from our destiny. Miss Chen grabbed her folder in my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. We slipped out the back entrance and down the fire escape into her car waiting in the alley. As we drove away, I saw Uncle Kenneth's BMW parked across the street. He was sitting inside, watching, those wedding shoes probably still in his trunk, waiting for their bride. Miss Chen drove through back streets I'd never seen before, checking her mirrors constantly for anyone following us. I sat hunched in the passenger seat, making myself small, watching familiar neighborhoods blur past the windows. Everything looked different now, like seeing the world without a filter I hadn't known was there. She pulled into a parking garage downtown, and we quickly switched to a different car she had waiting there, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. Her hands moved efficiently as she transferred boxes of documents between vehicles. She'd done this before, I realized, many times. We drove for 2 hours to a small town I'd never heard of, the city giving way to farmland and forest. Miss Chen had arranged a safe house through her network of former students who had escaped. The house belonged to a woman named Sarah, another escapee from a similar family system, someone who understood without needing explanation. Sarah opened the door before we even knocked, ushered us inside quickly, and drew all the curtains with practiced movements. She was in her 30s with kind eyes and the same wrist scar we all seemed to share. She showed me to a small bedroom upstairs with multiple locks on the door, clean sheets, fresh towels, clothes in various sizes already laid out on the dresser. Miss Chen had been preparing for this possibility, for girls who ran with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I changed out of my pajamas and sat on the bed, finally processing what I'd done. I'd broken the most fundamental rule of our family structure. I'd refused my uncle's claim, rejected centuries of tradition, chosen myself over the family's needs. The weight of it hit me all at once. Downstairs, Miss Chen and Sarah spread documents across the dining table like detectives working a case. Birth certificates, claiming records, death certificates with suspiciously similar causes. Sarah pointed to patterns in the dates, her finger tracing connections I'd never noticed. Girls who died young always had their deaths recorded exactly 3 years after their commitment ceremonies. Almost like clockwork, Miss Chen had highlighted financial transfers that happened after each death. Insurance policies, inheritance distributions, property transfers. The uncles weren't just claiming wives for tradition or twisted love, they were farming assets, using the girls as financial instruments that paid out after their conveniently timed deaths. My phone, still turned off, sat heavy in my pocket like a stone. I knew there would be hundreds of messages by now, threats disguised as concern from uncles, guilt wrapped in love from my parents, commands hidden in pleas from the elders. I'd seen it happen when cousin Melissa tried to refuse her claiming 5 years ago. The family had worn her down with coordinated pressure, taking shifts to call and text and visit until she apologized for her selfishness and submitted. She lasted 18 months after her ceremony before dying from complications during a miscarriage that the family doctor said was just bad luck. Miss Chen knocked gently and entered with a laptop. She showed me secure message boards where other escaped girls shared information and support. Anonymous posts about which family members to avoid, which relatives might secretly help, how to spot someone who'd been sent to retrieve you. Warning signs to watch for. I recognized some of the stories as girls I'd grown up with who had supposedly moved away for college or marriage to distant relatives. They'd been hiding this whole time, building new lives while we mourned them as lost. I spent hours reading their experiences, feeling less alone with each story. The attempted retrievals by uncles who couldn't accept losing their property, the family members who'd pretended to help only to deliver them back for a finder's fee. The careful planning required to save younger sisters and cousins still in the system. Some had succeeded in rescue missions, many had failed. All carried guilt about the ones they'd left behind. Sarah made dinner while Miss Chen worked on documents. The normal domestic sounds strangely comforting. She was building a comprehensive case file, she explained, though not for legal purposes since the law had already failed us once. This was for protection, leverage, evidence to use if the family escalated their retrieval efforts. She'd learned over the years that documentation was power, even if the courts wouldn't listen to it. Information could be traded, used to negotiate, deployed strategically to protect the network. That night, I turned on my phone briefly to check for messages from Emma, my finger hovering over the power button. Between the hundreds of family messages filling the screen, I found one from her hospital room. She was being discharged tomorrow against the doctor's recommendation. Her parents were taking her home to continue her recovery in familiar surroundings. She was terrified of what that meant. I wrote back quickly, my fingers flying over the screen, telling her about Miss Chen's safe house network and giving her the emergency number. Then I turned the phone off again before the constant message notifications could weaken my resolve. Every ping had been trained to provoke obedience. Miss Chen woke me before dawn, gently shaking my shoulder. We needed to move again. Sarah had spotted a familiar car circling the neighborhood during her midnight security check. The family had found us already, their network of connections and resources stretching further than we'd hoped. We packed quickly and efficiently, taking only essentials and the precious document boxes. Sarah would stay behind to misdirect anyone who came asking, to buy us time with false information. We drove to another safe house 3 towns over, the sun rising behind us as we put distance between ourselves and danger. This one belonged to Maria, who'd escaped her family 15 years ago after her own claiming ceremony had turned violent. She ran a small bed and breakfast now, providing legitimate cover for girls who needed temporary shelter. The business gave her reasons to have strangers coming and going, to have multiple bedrooms, to accept cash payments that couldn't be traced. Maria took one look at me and immediately set up a room in the back, away from windows and with easy access to multiple exits. She'd learned the hard way that uncles often tried to break in at night to retrieve their property. Miss Chen left to check on Emma at the hospital, her face grim with determination. I spent the day helping Maria with legitimate bed and breakfast tasks, cleaning rooms and preparing breakfast, trying to keep my hands busy while my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Every car that passed made me tense. Every phone ring made me jump, wondering if the family had found this number too. Maria noticed my anxiety and taught me breathing exercises she'd learned in therapy, ways to manage the constant fear that came with freedom. Recovery was a long process, she said gently. Freedom was just the first step, learning to feel safe, to make choices, to exist without the weight of predetermined fate. That took years, and she was still working on it herself. Miss Chen returned that evening with devastating news written all over her face. Emma was gone. Her parents had checked her out early in the morning, and the hospital couldn't legally say where they'd taken her. The emergency number I'd given her hadn't been called. No messages, no signals, no cries for help. We both knew what this meant. They were accelerating her training to prevent another escape attempt, probably taking her somewhere even more isolated than Uncle Adam's cabin. I wanted to go back for her immediately, my whole body vibrating with the need to act. Miss Chen stopped me with gentle but firm hands on my shoulders, explaining what I already knew deep down but didn't want to accept. Walking back into the family now would only result in 2 trapped girls instead of 1. We needed a plan, resources, leverage, the right opportunity. Emotional rescue attempts were how girls got recaptured and punished. Maria joined our planning session around her kitchen table, bringing her own expertise. She had successfully extracted her younger sister 8 years ago through careful manipulation of family dynamics. It had taken months of preparation, creating exactly the right circumstances. waiting for the perfect moment when the family was distracted by internal conflict. Patience was crucial, she emphasized. Mistakes meant losing any chance to help and often resulted in the trapped girl facing even worse conditions. We spent the next days establishing routines that felt almost normal. I helped Maria with the bed and breakfast, learning to cook for guests, clean rooms professionally, manage bookings, and inventory. Normal skills I'd never been taught because wives in our family only needed to know how to serve their husbands. Miss Chen came and went like a guardian angel, checking other safe houses in her network, monitoring family movements through various contacts, gathering intelligence through connections she'd built over decades. A week into hiding, Maria's security camera system alerted us to visitors approaching. Two men in expensive suits walking up the driveway with the confident stride of family enforcers. Not uncles themselves, but cousins or nephews sent to retrieve property that had gone missing. Maria directed me calmly to the hidden room behind the pantry while she answered the door, switching into her professional innkeeper persona. I crouched in the dark space that smelled of canned goods and cleaning supplies, listening to muffled voices through the thin wall. Maria played the confused innkeeper perfectly, offering to check her guest registry, asking for photos of their missing relatives, suggesting they file a proper missing persons report if they were truly concerned. The men grew frustrated with her helpful incompetence, but remained polite, not wanting to draw suspicion. They'd be back. We all knew. This was just the first probe, testing our defenses. After they left, we implemented new security measures throughout the house. Different exit routes mapped and practiced, coded messages established for different threat levels, a rotation schedule between safe houses to avoid staying in one place too long. I couldn't become comfortable anywhere. The family had resources, connections built over centuries, infinite patience. They'd spent generations perfecting their system of control and retrieval. Miss Chen brought news about other girls during her visits. My sister Lucy had started showing signs of resistance, asking questions during her training sessions that made Uncle Henry uncomfortable. My cousin Hannah had been caught with a hidden phone, trying to research women's rights and legal options. Small rebellions that gave us hope but also created urgency. The family would tighten control in response to my escape, accelerating timelines and restricting freedoms. 2 weeks in, I made a mistake that could have cost everything. Loneliness and worry overwhelmed my judgment. I turned on my phone to check for any word from Emma and saw a message from my cousin Rebecca. She'd always been kind to me, sneaking me extra food when Uncle Kenneth's punishments included fasting, covering for me when I made mistakes during family gatherings. Her message was simple but urgent. She wanted to help. She had information about Emma's whereabouts. Could we meet somewhere safe? I showed Miss Chen the message immediately, knowing the risk but hoping for Emma's sake. She studied it carefully, cross-referencing Rebecca's name in her extensive files. No red flags in her history, no previous betrayals of other girls, but also no history of resistance or helping others escape. Neutral family members were the most dangerous, Miss Chen explained. They could go either way depending on pressure and incentive. We decided to risk a phone call instead of a meeting, using a burner phone that couldn't be traced back to our location. Miss Chen would monitor the call, ready to cut the connection if it seemed like a trap. I dialed Rebecca's number with trembling hands, each ring seeming to last forever. Rebecca answered on the first ring, her voice strained with nervousness. She spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other as she shared what she knew. Emma was being held at Uncle Adam's main house in the suburbs, not the cabin where she'd been found before. The family was planning to move up her commitment ceremony to next month. Before her 13th birthday, before she could cause more trouble, they wanted to prevent another escape attempt by making the claiming official as soon as possible. I asked Rebecca why she was helping, what had changed her mind about the family traditions. She paused for a long moment, then admitted she'd been claimed by Uncle Henry's oldest son last year, a secondary claiming that happened when primary uncles had too many wives. She'd seen what happened to the wives from the inside now. She didn't want that fate for Emma or any of us, but she couldn't leave herself. Not with her younger sister still at home, not with her parents depending on the financial support that came with compliance. Miss Chen cut the call after 3 minutes to prevent any possibility of tracing. Too long and the family's tech-savvy younger members could pinpoint our location. We had information now, but also a ticking clock counting down to Emma's ceremony. 1 month to figure out how to extract a heavily guarded 12-year-old before her life was sealed forever. After that, she'd be moved to her uncle's house permanently, and access would become nearly impossible. Maria suggested reaching out to her broader network for help. Other safe houses might have resources we could use, people positioned in helpful professions, former victims who had built new lives in law enforcement or social services. Miss Chen agreed but warned about expanding the circle of trust too quickly. Every new person involved increased the risk of exposure or betrayal. The family had ways of finding leverage over anyone. I spent sleepless nights thinking about Emma alone and afraid, facing what I'd narrowly escaped. 12 years old and counting down to a ceremony that would end her childhood and begin her life as property. The guilt ate at me constantly. If I hadn't run, maybe I could have protected her somehow, prepared her better, taught her how to survive. But I knew that was the family's conditioning talking, the trained response that individual sacrifice was noble. Individual sacrifice didn't save anyone in our system. It just created more victims for the uncles to claim. Miss Chen introduced me to Dr. Kim, a therapist who specialized in helping cult survivors. I bristled at the word cult, my training immediately rejecting the label. We were a family, not a cult. We had traditions, not brainwashing. But Dr. Kim explained gently that what we'd experienced met every clinical definition. Isolated beliefs that contradicted mainstream society, control mechanisms that prevented questioning, punishment for any form of resistance, financial exploitation disguised as tradition. Recognizing it was part of breaking free, she said. The first step in healing was naming the harm correctly. Our sessions were difficult, each one peeling back layers of programming I didn't even know existed. Dr. Kim helped me identify the deep conditioning I'd internalized without realizing it. The automatic guilt when I thought about my uncle's disappointment, the fear of the outside world that had been instilled since birth, the belief that I was betraying my culture and family by refusing my predetermined role. These thoughts weren't mine, she explained patiently. They'd been installed through years of careful training, repetition, and punishment. 3 weeks into hiding, the family escalated their search. Uncle Kenneth found one of the safe houses in the network, though thankfully not the one where I was staying. He'd broken in while it was empty and taken photos of everything inside, documenting the network's existence. Now he knew about the other girls who'd escaped over the years. The extent of Miss Chen's operation, the resources we had access to. The family would use this information strategically. We had to assume all documented locations were compromised. Maria moved me to a new place that night, a cabin owned by her friend who wasn't officially part of the network, off the grid with no paper trail connecting it to our organization. Miss Chen went dark for several days, communicating only through encrypted channels that the family couldn't intercept. The isolation was harder than I'd expected. No internet access, no phone except for emergencies, no contact with the outside world except for Maria's brief check-ins. Just me alone in the forest with my thoughts and the constant fear that every snapping twig was someone coming to claim me. I wrote in journals that Miss Chen had provided, documenting my memories while they were still fresh and painful. Evidence, she'd said, for ourselves if no one else would listen. Writing helped me process what had happened, to see the patterns I'd been too close to recognize before. The way they isolated us from outside influences, the way they made us complicit in our own oppression, the way they used love and family loyalty as weapons. A week before Emma's ceremony, Rebecca sent another message through a complex chain of contacts that took days to reach us safely. The family was fracturing under the pressure of recent events. My escape had triggered something unexpected. Other girls were asking dangerous questions. Some parents were having doubts about the tradition, especially mothers who had been claimed wives themselves. Not enough resistance to stop the system entirely, but enough to create cracks in the foundation. Miss Chen saw an opportunity in the chaos. If we could extract Emma successfully during this period of instability, it might inspire others to resist or escape. But it had to be done carefully, without violence or legal involvement that could backfire. We needed Emma to walk out on her own feet, publicly, in a way the family couldn't deny or reverse later. The plan came together slowly over several late-night sessions. Rebecca would ensure Emma had access to a phone at a crucial moment. Miss Chen would arrange for a school counselor to be present at a public location, someone with the authority to intervene. I would make direct contact with Emma and convince her to ask for help in front of witnesses who couldn't be dismissed or bribed. Simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. We had one shot at this. The day before her ceremony, Emma would be taken to the courthouse to sign preliminary documents that would make the claiming legally complex to reverse. A public space with security, multiple exits, potential witnesses who weren't family members. Rebecca would create a distraction at exactly the right moment. Miss Chen would be positioned as backup if things went wrong. I would approach Emma directly, despite the risk of being recognized and recaptured myself. The night before the plan, I couldn't sleep at all. Everything could go wrong in so many ways. It was probably a trap designed to recapture me. Even if it wasn't, Emma might be too scared or too conditioned to accept help when the moment came. The training ran deep, and she'd been under intensive conditioning for months now. But we had to try. Leaving her there to face her ceremony wasn't an option I could live with. Miss Chen drove me to the town before dawn, both of us silent with tension. We parked blocks away from the courthouse in a spot with multiple escape routes. I wore a wig that changed my appearance, sunglasses despite the early hour, clothes that made me look older and unrecognizable. Miss Chen took position near the back entrance with a clear view of the situation. I waited across from the courthouse entrance, pretending to read a newspaper while my hands shook so badly I could barely hold it steady. Every minute felt like an hour. Every car that passed could be carrying family members. Then I saw them arrive in Uncle Adam's black SUV. He got out first, scanning the area with predatory alertness, then reached back to help someone exit. Emma emerged wearing a white dress that made her look even younger than 12, the fabric emphasizing her thinness from months of stress. Her hair was styled formally with pearls woven through it, her face pale under carefully applied makeup that couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. She moved mechanically, like a puppet, with her uncle's hand firm on her shoulder, guiding each step. Behind them, her parents followed, carrying a folder of documents that would seal her fate. Her mother wore the same expression of resigned acceptance I'd seen at Amy's ceremony. Her father checked his phone repeatedly, probably coordinating with other family members. They climbed the courthouse steps slowly, Emma's feet dragging slightly with each step. I forced myself to wait according to plan, to trust that Rebecca would create the promised distraction. But as they reached the door, nothing happened. They went inside without incident, my window of opportunity closing. I made a split-second decision that could have ruined everything. Plan or no plan, I couldn't let Emma disappear into that building where legal documents would bind her to Uncle Adam forever. I dropped the newspaper and ran across the street, taking the courthouse steps 2 at a time. My heart pounding so hard I thought everyone must hear it. Through the glass doors, I saw them at the security checkpoint, Emma's white dress stark against the metal detectors. Security stopped me immediately, asking for identification. I fumbled with the fake documents Maria had provided, buying precious time while searching for Emma in the crowd of early morning courthouse visitors. There she was, by those elevators with her family, the doors sliding open like the mouth of a monster. In seconds, she'd be gone to an upper floor where judges and lawyers would make her imprisonment legal and binding. I called her name, not loud enough to cause a scene that would bring all security running, but sharp enough to cut through the courthouse murmur. She turned, and for a moment I saw recognition flash across her face before the careful blankness returned. The mask we all learned to wear. Uncle Adam's hand tightened visibly on her shoulder, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt through the delicate fabric. He steered her firmly toward the elevator, but Emma's feet dragged with more determination now. She was resisting subtly but definitely, buying us precious seconds. The elevator doors started to close with them still outside. Then Rebecca appeared running from the other direction, her timing perfect after all. She called urgently for Uncle Adam, breathless with manufactured panic. "Family emergency," she gasped convincingly. Uncle Henry needed him immediately. Something about property documents being challenged, inheritance issues that could cost millions. Uncle Adam hesitated, caught between his claim on Emma and the family obligation to protect their financial interests. The security guard was still checking my fake identification, taking his time with bureaucratic thoroughness. I watched Emma's parents debate in hushed tones, her mother looking relieved at the delay, her father annoyed at the disruption to their schedule. The elevator doors closed without them, buying us more time. Uncle Adam stepped away to take a phone call about the supposed emergency, leaving Emma with just her mother. This was the moment we'd hoped for. I walked past security with false confidence, straight to Emma, my heart hammering against my ribs. Her mother saw me coming and grabbed Emma's wrist in a grip that would leave bruises, but I reached them first. Kneeling to Emma's eye level and speaking quickly but clearly. Miss Chen was outside ready to help, I told her. Safety was possible right now in this moment. She just had to say she wanted help. She just had to speak the words in front of witnesses. Emma's mother tried to pull her away, hissing at me to leave them alone, threatening to call security. But we'd drawn attention now from other courthouse visitors. A security officer approached with professional concern, asking if everything was all right, his hand resting on his radio. And in that moment, with witnesses watching and help just seconds away, Emma spoke in a voice that started as a whisper but grew stronger with each word. "I want to go to school," she said, her words coming faster as if a dam had broken inside her. "Real school with other kids my age. I don't want to get married to my uncle. I'm only 12 years old. Please help me. I don't want to go with them." The words came out in a rush, like water breaking through a cracked dam, each one striking the watching crowd like a physical blow. Her mother's grip loosened in shock at the public defiance. The security officer's expression shifted from routine concern to genuine alarm as he processed what he was hearing. A lawyer paused nearby to observe, her briefcase forgotten. A court clerk stepped out from behind her desk, drawn by the commotion. More witnesses gathering every second, too many for the family to dismiss or bribe later. Emma kept talking, her voice growing stronger and clearer with each word. She told them she wanted to be a teacher like Miss Chen, who had tried to help her. She wanted to choose her own life when she was old enough. She didn't want to live with Uncle Adam, who hurt her when she asked questions. She was scared and she needed help, and she was only 12 years old. I stood and took Emma's hand gently but firmly. Together, we walked toward the exit while the security officer called for backup, not to stop us, but to manage the situation. Uncle Adam returned from his phone call and saw the scene, his face cycling through shock, rage, and calculation in seconds. He called after us, his voice shifting from commanding to pleading to threatening, but Emma didn't look back. She held my hand tighter and kept walking toward the door where freedom waited. Miss Chen had the car running outside, positioned perfectly for a quick departure. We got in smoothly, Emma in the middle seat between us, me blocking the door in case anyone tried to grab her. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I saw Uncle Adam on the steps, his phone pressed to his ear, already coordinating the family's response to this very public loss of property. Emma sat silent for the first hour of driving, her body rigid with tension as if she expected to be caught and dragged back at any moment. Then, as we reached the highway and put real distance between us and the courthouse, she began to cry. Not the careful, quiet tears we'd been taught were appropriate for ladies, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from her soul. Miss Chen and I held her between us while she let out years of fear and pain and suppressed emotion. She cried until she had no tears left, then slept against my shoulder while we drove toward safety. That night, in a new safe house even Maria didn't know about, Emma told us everything about her months of captivity. The escalated training designed to break her spirit after her first escape attempt. The punishments that went far beyond standing in corners with heavy books. The constant reminders that she belonged to Uncle Adam, that resistance was selfishness that hurt the whole family, that good girls accepted their fate gracefully. She showed us scars I hadn't seen before, evidence of corrections that had gone too far. But she also told us about unexpected sources of hope during her imprisonment. My sister Lucy had managed to sneak her a note of encouragement. Our cousin Hannah had found Miss Chen's old website and shared it with other girls through whispered conversations. Others were questioning the system, doubting the traditions, planning their own escapes. My successful flight had shown them it was possible. Emma's public refusal at the courthouse would show them even more. Escape could happen in daylight, in front of witnesses, without shame or secrecy. Miss Chen worked through the night to activate legal protections for Emma through her school district contacts. Not criminal charges against the family, since we'd learned that route was frustratingly useless. Instead, she pursued educational advocacy, mandatory counseling requirements, supervised visitation orders if the family tried to claim parental rights, bureaucratic shields that would buy time and create paper trails. The family's response came within days, but not through the expected channels of legal threats or violent retrieval attempts. Instead, they launched something more insidious, a coordinated campaign to destroy the network that had saved us. They began spreading carefully crafted stories about Miss Chen through their extensive connections. She was portrayed as a predator who groomed vulnerable girls, a kidnapper who destroyed families, a radical feminist corrupting traditional values. They had resources accumulated over centuries, connections in media and law enforcement, generations of practice at controlling narratives. Some people believed them, especially those who were already suspicious of anyone who helped runaway teens. Miss Chen lost her teaching position while the school investigated the accusations. 2 safe houses were reported to authorities as suspicious locations harboring runaways. The network that had saved dozens of girls over decades began to fracture under the coordinated pressure. But something unexpected happened in response to the family's campaign. The girls still trapped in the system began reaching out more desperately than ever. The family's public attacks had inadvertently confirmed that escape was possible, that there was help available, that other girls had successfully fled. They wanted to know how we'd done it. They wanted to know when they could run. They wanted to know if we could help them too. The messages came through hidden phones, coded letters, whispered communications at family gatherings where guards were becoming careless. I looked at Emma, safe but still haunted by her ordeal, free but far from healed. Recovery would take years of therapy and support. I thought about my sister Lucy, my cousins, all the girls still counting down days until their ceremonies. The family thought they'd won by silencing Miss Chen and damaging the network. They didn't understand that they'd created something bigger and more resilient. We couldn't save everyone immediately. Maybe we couldn't even save most of them given our limited resources. But we could try one girl at a time, one careful extraction after another. We could build a new network from the ashes of the old one, learning from our mistakes and adapting to the family's tactics. It would take years, maybe decades, to truly dismantle their system. But we had something the family didn't expect us to have after generations of conditioning. We had each other across the network, and we had hope that grew stronger with each successful escape. The next morning brought a development none of us had anticipated in our wildest hopes. Miss Chen received a message through one of her oldest contacts in the network. My mother wanted to meet, not with family members present, not at our house where she could be monitored, but alone at a public cafe downtown. She was taking an enormous risk even suggesting such a meeting. Miss Chen immediately suspected a trap, another attempt to locate and retrieve me. But I recognized something in the message's specific wording that others might miss. My mother had used a phrase she'd taught me years ago during a rare moment of genuine connection between us. It was code that meant she was acting without my father's knowledge, going against the family for reasons of her own. We debated for hours about how to respond. Maria argued against any contact with family members, no matter how seemingly repentant. The risk was too high, the potential for betrayal too likely. Miss Chen worried about surveillance, about being followed back to our safe house by family operatives. But I kept thinking about my sister Lucy, still trapped at home, still facing her own ceremony in just 2 years. If my mother was genuinely reaching out, if something had changed her perspective, it could mean access to inside information we desperately needed to save others. Miss Chen arranged the meeting with multiple fail-safes and precautions. A public location with excellent sightlines and several exit routes, spotters positioned at key points to watch for family members, a predetermined signal system if things went wrong. I would observe from a safe distance but not make direct contact. I watched from across the street as my mother entered the cafe, and my heart clenched at how different she looked. Her usual confident stride had been replaced by something more hesitant and unsure. She sat alone at a corner table, checking her phone repeatedly with nervous movements I'd never seen from her before. The controlled, perfect wife and mother was showing cracks in her facade. Miss Chen entered 10 minutes later, giving the all-clear signal before taking a seat across from my mother. Through the cafe window, I watched their interaction unfold like a silent movie. My mother's hands trembled visibly as she pushed a thick envelope across the table. Miss Chen examined its contents carefully, her expression growing more serious with each document she reviewed. At one point, she looked up sharply at my mother, who nodded and seemed to be explaining something urgently. The meeting lasted exactly 20 minutes as planned. When Miss Chen emerged, she walked in the opposite direction from our vehicle, following our predetermined route to ensure she wasn't being followed. I met her 3 blocks away at our designated pickup point, burning with curiosity about what had transpired. Her face was grim as we drove to yet another safe house. This one an hour outside the city in a rural area where strangers would be noticed immediately. Only when we were secure inside did she share what my mother had provided. Inside the envelope were documents my mother had been secretly collecting for months, possibly years, bank statements showing the systematic financial transfers after each wife's death, medical records that contradicted official causes of death, revealing patterns of abuse and neglect, insurance policies taken out on young wives without their knowledge. Most importantly, there was a comprehensive list of girls currently in the family system, complete with their ages, their assigned uncles, and their scheduled ceremony dates. My sister Lucy was listed for her grooming visits to begin in just 6 months when she turned 13. My cousin Hannah's ceremony was set for next spring. There were 12 girls total on the list, ranging from infants recently claimed to teenagers approaching their ceremonies, all trapped in the same system Emma and I had escaped, all facing the same fate as Amy and so many others before her. My mother's note was brief but devastating in its honesty. She couldn't leave, not with Lucy still at home and vulnerable. The family would never let her take Lucy if she tried to run. But she could no longer watch girls die while pretending it was tradition and honor. Amy's death had started her questioning. Emma's condition, when found, had strengthened her doubts. My escape had shown her that resistance was possible, even from within. She wanted Lucy to have a chance at a different life, even if it meant betraying everything she'd been taught to value. Miss Chen spent the night analyzing the documents with forensic attention to detail, cross-referencing them with her existing files. The financial patterns were even clearer with this inside information. Each uncle received substantial payouts after their wives' deaths through a complex system of insurance policies and inheritance structures, money that funded the next claiming ceremony in an endless cycle. It was a self-perpetuating machine of exploitation that had enriched the family for generations while leaving a trail of dead young women. Emma had been quiet since our dramatic courthouse escape, processing her trauma in her own way. But seeing the list of girls still trapped, especially the younger ones who didn't yet understand their fate, sparked something in her. She began writing letters to each girl on the list. Not to mail directly, she explained, but to document what they were facing in words they might understand when they were older. What the family wouldn't tell them about their futures. Evidence for later when they were ready to question the traditions and seek help. Her letters were heartbreaking in their simple honesty, one survivor reaching out to future survivors with truth and compassion. 3 days after my mother's meeting, we received word through the network that shook us all. Uncle Kenneth had been seen at my old high school, methodically questioning my former teachers and classmates about my habits and friendships. Anyone who might have helped me or might know where I was hiding. The school had protocols for such situations, but his persistence was concerning. He was expanding his search beyond family channels, using resources we hadn't anticipated. He was also spreading rumors about me among my former peers, painting me as troubled and ungrateful, someone who had abandoned her loving family for dangerous influences. Some believed him, especially those who had always found our family's wealth and closeness enviable from the outside. Miss Chen decided we needed to shift from reactive to proactive measures. Waiting for the next crisis meant another girl might not survive her ceremony. Using my mother's information about ceremony dates and locations, she began reaching out to specific contacts who might be positioned to help. Teachers at the girls' schools who could watch for signs of abuse. Counselors who might notice concerning behaviors. Neighbors who'd witnessed things but hadn't known what to do about it. Not enough to trigger full investigations that the family could deflect with their lawyers, but enough to create a network of watchful eyes that might spot opportunities for intervention. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source showing how the family's control was weakening. Rebecca sent another message through our secure channels, this time with news about Uncle Henry. My sister Lucy's assigned uncle had suffered a stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed and unable to fulfill his claiming duties. The family was in chaos, debating whether his claim on Lucy was still valid or if she should be reassigned to another uncle like a piece of property changing hands. Some argued tradition demanded the claim be honored regardless of his condition. Others saw an opportunity to claim an uncommitted girl for themselves. The uncertainty and infighting had created a window of opportunity we couldn't ignore. I wanted to extract Lucy immediately while the family was distracted by their internal power struggle, but Miss Chen counseled strategic patience. A rushed attempt would alert the family to our intentions and close any future opportunities. They would tighten security around all the girls if they suspected another extraction was imminent. Instead, she worked with my mother to ensure Lucy had access to a burner phone hidden in her room, to information about the outside world through carefully selected library books, to the knowledge that escape was possible when the time was right. We were planting seeds that would grow when the moment came for harvest. Meanwhile, the family's campaign against Miss Chen and the network intensified to new levels of aggression. They hired a private investigator to track down safe houses using financial records and property databases. They filed complaints with school boards across 3 states, child protective services in multiple jurisdictions, anyone who would listen to their story of a teacher corrupting innocent young girls. Some authorities dismissed their claims as clearly vindictive, but others took them seriously enough to investigate, draining our resources and time. We had to move more frequently than ever, sometimes staying only a few days in each location before security concerns forced another relocation. The network of safe houses was straining under the constant pressure. Some supporters backed away completely, frightened by the family's resources and determination to destroy anyone who helped their escaped property. Others stood firm, but the constant vigilance was exhausting everyone involved. We were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy with centuries of experience and seemingly unlimited resources. 1 month after Emma's escape, we received devastating news that reminded us why we couldn't give up. My cousin Melissa, who'd been forced back into the family 5 years ago after a failed escape attempt, had died. The official cause was complications during pregnancy, the same explanation used for so many deaths before hers. But we knew the truth was far darker. She was the fourth wife to die within 3 years of her ceremony, following the exact pattern my mother's documents had revealed. Her uncle was already in discussions with family elders about his next claim, shopping for a younger replacement. The news hit Emma particularly hard. She'd looked up to Melissa during family gatherings, had seen her as proof that resistance was possible even if it failed. Now Melissa was gone, another casualty of the system we were fighting against. That night, Emma made a decision that showed remarkable courage for someone so young. She would create a formal legal deposition detailing her experiences. Not to file immediate charges, but to have ready when the time was right. Miss Chen arranged for a sympathetic lawyer to take Emma's statement, a woman who was herself a survivor of family abuse and understood the importance of documentation. For 3 hours, Emma spoke steadily and clearly, detailing everything she had endured. The grooming process that started when she could barely walk, the isolation techniques that cut her off from outside influences, the punishments for resistance that escalated into torture, the psychological manipulation that made girls believe they deserved their fate, that resistance was selfishness that hurt the family. The lawyer documented every word with professional precision, creating a record that couldn't be dismissed or destroyed. While Emma gave her deposition, I worked with Maria on the urgent task of expanding our safe house network. We needed more locations across a wider geographic area, more resources to support girls who'd lost everything, more people willing to shelter escapees despite the risks. Maria reached out to her contacts in other states, explaining our situation without revealing specific details that could compromise security. Slowly, a broader network began to form, connected by shared purpose and the understanding that systems like ours existed in shadows everywhere. My phone, which I'd kept off for weeks to avoid the family's tracking attempts, finally died completely. The battery gave out, and I felt oddly relieved. The constant temptation to check for messages, to see what new pressure tactics they were applying, to read my father's guilt-inducing texts was finally gone. Miss Chen provided me with a new phone under a false identity, a clean number known only to our most trusted network members. It felt like cutting an invisible chain that had still connected me to my old life. 2 months after my escape, Uncle Kenneth made his boldest and most desperate move yet. He showed up at Maria's bed and breakfast, not with enforcers or family lawyers, but completely alone. He sat in the lobby for hours, like a ghost haunting the living, telling anyone who would listen about his runaway niece who'd been brainwashed by dangerous radicals. He showed photos of me from my training days, carefully curated to make me look happy and loved. Maria handled him with the expertise of someone who'd faced desperate uncles before. She played the concerned innkeeper perfectly while secretly alerting the entire network to his presence. Security cameras recorded everything, creating evidence of his harassment. I watched the footage later that night, studying his behavior with a mixture of fear and fascination. He looked older than I remembered, more desperate, his confident authority replaced by something almost pathetic. The uncle who had trained me every Sunday with such patience and control was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't accept that his property had simply walked away. He left only when Maria threatened to call the police, but not before trying one last manipulation. He left a letter for me with the front desk, knowing Maria would have to pass it along. I burned it unread. I didn't need to know what promises or threats it contained. That life was behind me now. The family was fracturing in other ways too, according to my mother's careful reports. Arguments had broken out over the claiming system itself, with some younger family members questioning why such traditions were necessary in modern times. Others doubled down defensively, insisting that our escapes proved the need for stricter control and earlier claiming. The unity that had protected their system for generations was cracking like ice under spring sun. 3 months after my escape, we achieved our first carefully coordinated extraction. My cousin Hannah, whose ceremony was fast approaching, had been in secret contact with Miss Chen through the phone my mother had provided. Unlike my desperate flight or Emma's dramatic courthouse scene, this extraction was meticulously planned to minimize risk. Hannah simply didn't come home from school one day. Instead, she met Miss Chen at a predetermined location and vanished into our network like smoke. By the time her assigned uncle realized she was gone, she was already 2 states away under a new identity. The family's response was swift but chaotic, showing how much their control had deteriorated. Without unity, their search efforts overlapped and conflicted, different factions accusing each other of incompetence or complicity. Uncle Kenneth insisted I had orchestrated the escape from hiding, while Hannah's assigned uncle blamed my mother for providing inside access. The infighting gave Hannah precious time to establish herself safely in her new life. Miss Chen used the chaos of Hannah's escape to activate more extraction plans that had been months in preparation. Over the next 4 weeks, 2 more girls made their successful escapes from the family. One simply walked out during a family gathering, taking advantage of the adults' distraction during a heated argument about the claiming system's future. Another used her grooming visit to a shopping mall as an opportunity, asking a store employee for help while her uncle was distracted by a phone call about family business. Each escape further destabilized the family structure that had seemed so unbreakable. Trust eroded between family members who now watched each other suspiciously. Mothers began guarding their daughters more carefully, but some were protecting them from uncles rather than preparing them for ceremonies. The system that had operated smoothly for generations was grinding to a halt, its gears clogged with doubt and resistance. 4 months after my escape, I received unexpected news that gave us hope for legal justice. The prosecutor who'd called me about the original charges being dropped had been quietly building a new case. Using Emma's deposition and the financial documents my mother had provided, she was pursuing fraud charges rather than abuse charges. The money trail was harder for expensive lawyers to dismiss or explain away. Insurance fraud, tax evasion, inheritance manipulation all left paper trails that couldn't be denied. We didn't celebrate the news. Legal victories were rare in these situations, and we'd learned not to hope too heavily for institutional justice. But it was pressure applied at a vulnerable point, another crack in the foundation that had seemed impervious. Some family members began moving assets overseas, preparing for potential legal troubles. Others started distancing themselves from the more aggressive uncles, creating factions within factions. My sister Lucy finally made direct contact using the phone my mother had hidden for her. Her message was brief but clear. She was scared but determined to escape. Uncle Henry's stroke had bought her time, but the family was pressuring her to accept a new claiming from his younger brother. She wanted out before they could reassign her like property being transferred between owners. Extracting Lucy required delicate planning given the increased scrutiny after recent escapes. She was being watched more carefully than ever, her movements restricted and monitored. My mother could only do so much without raising suspicion that would endanger them both. We needed a public opportunity with witnesses, a moment when the family couldn't simply drag her back home without consequences. The opportunity came through an unlikely source: her school's academic achievements. Lucy had secretly applied for and won a scholarship to a summer science program at a university across the country. When she presented this to the family, they were caught in their own rhetoric. They'd always claimed to value education and achievement, using it to justify their wealth and superiority. To deny her this opportunity would reveal their true priorities too clearly. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. My mother would drive Lucy to the airport for her supposed departure to the program, but instead of boarding the plane, Lucy would meet Miss Chen in a predetermined location within the airport's secure area. By the time the family realized she hadn't arrived at the program, she would be safely hidden within our network. Everything went wrong immediately because Uncle Kenneth had somehow learned about the plan. He was at the airport with 2 other family members, positioned to intercept Lucy before she could escape. But we'd learned from our mistakes and had contingencies. Emma created a distraction by calling in a tip about suspicious behavior, causing security to focus on the family members. In the resulting chaos, Lucy simply walked in a different direction, met Miss Chen at a backup location, and disappeared into a crowd of travelers. By the time Uncle Kenneth realized what had happened, Lucy was already on her way to safety, her phone destroyed and her old life left behind in an airport trash can. The family's response to losing Lucy was different from their previous reactions. Instead of unified fury, they turned on each other with vicious blame. My father blamed my mother for failing to control her daughters. Uncle Kenneth accused other family members of actively helping us. The younger generation began openly questioning why they were losing so many girls, whether perhaps the girls had valid reasons for running. Some uncles started fighting over the remaining claims, each worried their assigned girl would be next to escape. The foundation wasn't just cracking anymore. It was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of its own corruption. 5 months after my escape, I sat in a safe house with Emma, Lucy, Hannah, and 3 other girls who'd found their way to freedom through our network. We were scattered across different locations for safety, But Miss Chen had arranged this brief reunion to discuss our futures. Looking at their faces, I saw the same mixture of trauma and hope that I felt every day. We were survivors, but we were also still victims, processing what had been done to us. Recovery would take years, perhaps a lifetime, but at least now we had the chance to heal. Miss Chen presented us with options for building new lives. Some girls were pursuing education, getting their GEDs, and applying to colleges far from the family's reach. Others were learning trades that would let them support themselves independently. A few were working with lawyers to secure official protection orders. Though we all knew paper barriers meant little to determined uncles who believed they owned us, I chose to train with Miss Chen herself, learning how to identify girls in danger, how to build trust with someone who'd been conditioned to fear outside help, how to plan extractions that minimized risk. It wasn't an easy path. Every rescue attempt risked exposure and capture. But leaving other girls behind felt like abandoning pieces of myself still trapped in that old life. 6 months after my escape, the unthinkable happened. Uncle Kenneth died suddenly, not through violence or legal justice, but a simple car accident on an icy winter road. His car slid off the highway and hit a tree, killing him instantly. I felt nothing at first when I heard the news, just a blank numbness where emotion should be. Then came a confusing mix of relief and anger. He'd never face consequences for what he'd done to me and so many others, but he'd also never claim another girl. The wedding shoes I'd practiced walking in were found in his car trunk by police, who couldn't understand why a single man carried children's formal wear. They were still size 6, still waiting for feet that would never wear them. His death created chaos in the family hierarchy that had depended on his strength and influence. Without one of their strongest enforcers, other uncles began to worry about their own mortality and what would happen to their claims if they died. Some tried to accelerate ceremonies, pushing for younger and younger girls to be committed before they could escape. Others began to distance themselves from the system, perhaps finally understanding that it was dying. The old ways were ending, whether they accepted it or not. My mother made her choice then, with Lucy safe and the family structure in disarray. During a large family gathering where her absence wouldn't be immediately noticed, she quietly gathered important documents and left, not dramatically, not with confrontation, but simply walking out the door and driving to Miss Chen's designated meeting point. She never looked back, never returned for belongings or explanations. My father's rage was impotent without my mother to manage the household, without daughters to offer to his brothers, without the careful system that had supported their traditions. He was just an angry man shouting at empty rooms. 7 months after my escape, we received word that made everything worthwhile. The youngest girls on my mother's list, including 2 infants who had been claimed at birth, had been quietly removed from the family's reach. Their mothers, emboldened by our escapes and the family's obvious weakness, had fled to relatives who'd rejected the claiming system generations ago. These baby girls would grow up free from birth claims and grooming visits, never knowing they'd been saved from a fate that had destroyed so many before them. The network had evolved beyond what Miss Chen had originally built. Former victims became rescuers themselves, understanding the system from inside in ways outsiders never could. Safe houses multiplied across the country as more people learned about our cause. Teachers, counselors, and social workers learned to recognize the subtle signs of family claiming systems. It wasn't perfect, and we couldn't save everyone, but every girl who escaped weakened the system further, created more cracks for others to slip through. 8 months after my escape, I helped coordinate my first solo extraction. A 13-year-old cousin whose ceremony was just days away had reached out through channels my mother had established. Using everything I'd learned from Miss Chen and my own experience, I helped her walk away from a family gathering in broad daylight, just as I had done. The family couldn't stop her without revealing their true nature to the outside world they'd hidden from for so long. She walked out during dessert, excused herself to use the bathroom, and simply never came back. By the time they realized she was gone, she was already miles away starting her new life. The financial fraud case proceeded slowly but steadily through the court system. While we couldn't rely on legal justice alone, the pressure it created was useful. Family members turned on each other, trying to shift blame and protect their individual assets. The unified front that had protected their secrets for generations crumbled into factions and infighting, each trying to save themselves at others' expense. Some uncles tried desperately to adapt, claiming the escapes were a modern corruption that required returning to even stricter traditions. But without full family support, their efforts failed. Young men in the family began refusing to participate in the claiming system. Influenced by the outside world they'd been taught to fear and by the courage of the girls who'd escaped. The cycle was breaking at multiple points, too many to repair. 9 months after my escape, I stood in a small apartment I shared with two other survivors from different families with similar traditions. We supported each other through nightmares and panic attacks, through the guilt of leaving others behind, through the challenge of building normal lives from nothing. I had a job at a bookstore where no one knew my history, was studying for my GED at night, and was learning what it meant to make choices for myself. Every decision, from what to wear to what to eat for lunch, felt like a small revolution after years of having every detail controlled. Miss Chen's network had successfully extracted 17 girls total, not all from my family but from similar systems hidden in plain sight across the country. Each rescue was its own story of courage, careful planning, and the terrifying decision to believe a different life was possible. We couldn't publicize our victories widely without endangering the network, but word spread in whispers and careful messages to those who needed to hear it. The family still existed, still clung to their traditions, but they were a shadow of what they'd been. No new babies had been claimed in months, the registry gathering dust in a safe that fewer and fewer people opened. Ceremonies were postponed indefinitely as uncles faced the reality that their potential brides kept disappearing. Some branches of the family tree withered entirely as members chose the outside world over the bloodline. Uncle Thomas, who had claimed Amy and watched her die, died alone in his mansion. His wealth was meaningless without new wives to exploit. His legacy, nothing but empty rooms and bitter memories. 10 months after my escape, I got a message that made me cry for the first time in months. They were tears of joy and relief rather than pain. My youngest cousin, born after I'd fled, would never know the claiming system existed. Her parents had left the family entirely, choosing their daughter's freedom over generational wealth and acceptance. She would grow up picking her own path, making her own choices, maybe becoming a doctor or teacher or artist or whatever she dreamed. She would never know the weight of being owned from birth, never practice serving drinks at perfect temperatures, never stand in corners holding heavy books for tiny mistakes. She was free in a way I was still learning to be. The work continued endlessly. There were always more girls to help, more families hiding similar systems behind respectability and tradition, more battles to fight against those who believed they owned other human beings. Each victory proved what the family had tried to deny for centuries. We were not property to be claimed and traded. We were not investments to be groomed and cashed out. We were people who deserved to choose our own lives, make our own mistakes, love who we chose. Miss Chen eventually retired from active extractions, her health affected by years of stress and constant vigilance. But she'd built something that would outlast her, a network of survivors who became rescuers, of safe houses that became real homes, of whispered rebellions that became loud refusals to accept ownership. She'd saved dozens directly and inspired hundreds more to save themselves. Her true legacy lived in every girl who walked free. I thought about Uncle Kenneth sometimes when the nightmares came or when I saw expensive whiskey in store windows. I thought about those wedding shoes they'd found in his trunk, size 6 for feet that would never wear them. He'd been so certain I belonged to him, so confident in the system that had given him that certainty. He died never understanding that his certainty was exactly what we'd escaped from. He'd believed in ownership while we'd discovered autonomy. My story wasn't unique or special. Every girl in the network had her own version of escape and survival. Her own uncles left behind wondering how their property had simply walked away. Some stories ended happily with new lives built on freedom. Others involved compromise and continued struggle against trauma that didn't disappear with distance. But all of them ended with choice, the one thing the family had tried to steal from birth. Looking forward, I knew the fight wasn't over and might never be completely won. Systems like ours existed in shadows everywhere, protected by wealth and tradition and the silence of shame. But we'd proven they could be broken, one girl at a time, one careful extraction after another, one whispered truth that spread like cracks in a foundation until the whole structure came tumbling down. The family had called it securing the bloodline, preserving tradition, maintaining their legacy. We called it something else entirely. We called it what it was: slavery dressed up in ceremony, abuse wrapped in tradition, murder decorated with wedding dresses. But most of all, we called our escape by its true name: freedom. The simple, powerful freedom to choose our own lives and live them without fear. And that freedom, once tasted, could never be given back.